I was hoping that growth would pick up in the first month of this calendar year. December, as we all know, is usually a slow month. It's marked by deep discounts and so on, but January usually should be a pickup month. Now, Mahindra did well, but frankly, we did well because we've had two major launches in the recent months. But the threshold level of the auto industry hasn't gone up. I suppose there are many reasons for that. One is that the rural economy still seems to be extremely sluggish. And I believe that the spending the government is doing, all the right steps, by the way, on infrastructure and roads, for some reason still hasn't trickled down into a fillip to consumer spending. So you're right, we're still waiting.
You know, it's important that you say what you said, that the government is indeed spending. We're still to see signs of recovery with that spending. I must ask you this question. When is that turnaround quarter or the turnaround month going to be for the auto sector? It's been said it was going to be the third quarter of last fiscal. I mean, this fiscal, it was going to be the second quarter. It still hasn't happened. Economic recovery is weak, you're right. Rural economy is sagging. I want to speak to you a little more on that in just a bit. But when do you see that turnaround quarter, and what is going to lead to that?
I wish I knew. I've lost my faith in my own crystal ball. You're right. Most people, most industry members and participants were anticipating a turnaround in the last quarter of the last calendar year. We were very hopeful about January. And as I said, quite apart from why Mahindra has done well, I do not see that turnaround yet. Am I hopeful of it happening? Yes, I am, because as I said, the government has recognized that it needs to be the trigger. That consumption won't provide the trigger right now. The government, through investment spending, has to turn around the economy. And they're doing all the right things.
Right.
I'm puzzled myself. I hear from bankers that liquidity is tight. Most of the bankers seem to be unanimous today that they would want a rate cut. They would want a signal for investment. You know, if you really ask me, I think maybe the trigger will come from overseas infrastructure spenders. Perhaps the Japanese in the DMIC, the corridor, but we need a trigger, and that trigger hasn't happened yet.
I will just speak to you about the trigger in a bit, but I want to stay on with auto. And I must ask you, are you a little disappointed with being painted as these big bad boys of the auto sector? I mean, yes, pollution levels are high across the country, especially high in the city that we're speaking in, but being painted as the bad boys, does this disappoint you?
No, I think it's a very natural human reaction. And to be honest, the auto industry is in a no-win situation. There's no way that anything we say or any statement we make requiring rationality is going to wash, and that's the way it should be. Pollution is a problem. As far as we are concerned, at Mahindra, we are very, very clear that the health of the individual has to be our paramount concern. And that's why if you look at our investment pattern in powertrains, it's been to create an array of options. Why did we invest in Mahindra, in Reva? It was to create an option. We were the first to come out with a concept hybrid car many years ago at the Auto Expo. We then launched the gasoline M Falcon range of engines. Now that didn't happen with a stroke of a magic wand. Simply when pollution came up, we had recognized that all car companies need to be responsive, and whatever regulations require, whatever consumers require, and whatever technology requires one to do, we will do.
You know, it's important you say that, but you're talking more like a conscientious citizen than the head of one of the largest automobile companies in India. And there's a question that I'm going to ask you. Delhi has banned, the diesel cars. There is a lot of public debate around diesel cars. If this were to continue and spread across different parts of India, how is this going to change life for companies like yourselves? Are you going to go back? Have you already, in fact, gone back to the drawing board and looking at, like you said, you have an array of options. Are you looking at far more options away from diesel right now?
Well, first of all, you made a very interesting comment. You said you're behaving more like a conscientious citizen rather than the head of an automaker, as if that is some kind of dichotomy and never the twain shall meet. My point is that all businesses should be conscientious citizens. If you are not doing the right thing, if you are not invoking trust in the consumer, I don't think large companies will survive. It's an erosion of trust which is the biggest single threat to large corporations. We created the Credo Rise back in 2007. We started working on it because we recognized before the Occupy Wall Street movement that the biggest threat to business was an erosion of trust. And frankly, the biggest opportunity with consumers and to build a brand was to build trust. That's why we have an array of options. You said, are we going to go back to the drawing board? No, we've been on the drawing board.
Right.
The M Falcon is outside. The new E2O is outside. Formula E, you've seen everything that we've done in order to be ready, future ready for any technology.
So are we going to see more options like the ones that you're pointing out? Are we going to see more options from the pure play diesel vehicles that Mahindra was consciously or unconsciously being categorized for?
I think, as I said, I repeat myself, you saw us when we bought Mahindra Reva.
Right.
That should have been obvious that Mahindra is creating options for itself and believes that there are more than just one powertrain for the future.
You spoke about erosion of trust. At one level, do you concede there has been certain at least erosion of trust, not maybe at the citizen level, but at the institutional level, whether it's the courts or whether it's the informed citizens who are taking up this whole cause of pollution? Has there been an erosion of trust with companies like yourselves? I'm not singling you out, I'm talking about the industry at large.
I hope not with us. There is an unnamed elephant in the room that you are referring to, and clearly that was a problem. That when citizens feel that companies have been less than transparent about dealing with emission issues, then it affects the whole industry. We can't simply sit there and smirk at one person's misfortune. I think everybody in the industry has to realize that building trust is our number one priority.
You know, the crackdown on diesel, many people believe, and a lot of auto people that we speak to, at least the experts who we call them, say is obviously going to have a natural transition to petrol. How does this change life for companies like yourselves?
Again, my answer is in what we do, not what we theorize.
Right.
The M Falcon series is outside. The KUV 100 that has been launched is launched with that new series. We are ready for anything. We will be ready with whatever powertrains. We have a very robust R&D in Mahindra Research Valley in Chennai. We work with the best teams in the world. Whatever the powertrain transitions, we'll be ready. It's interesting you say a natural transition to gasoline.
Right.
Don't forget, one of the first earliest cars was electric.
That's true.
As you all know. So is that a natural transition to electric? Guess who will be ready?
It will be Mahindra perhaps.
I
But
hope
you know,
so.
the government is talking about leapfrogging to Bharat Stage 6. It was an unprecedented meeting of sorts with Mr. Gadkari where we saw everybody from the auto sector come together and talk about it. Do you think the industry is ready to leapfrog at an earlier date than earlier anticipated?
You know, I'm going to sound very abstract when I say this, but the fact is, I've had a career now where I've encountered many situations where people said this is impossible. And then miraculously it gets done. My engineers might kick me in the rear end for sounding like this, but I'll just tell them that, you know, many times people have come and said you couldn't do this and you did. So if that's what the government and the people want, we'll do it.
So from an industry point of view, would you want a staggered approach to it, or do you think it's always good to have it at one go? There's going to be less confusion, there's going to be less hurdles to meet along the way if it's done in one go?
You know, I'm in a no-win situation with whatever I answer in all auto industry. So I'm just going to repeat like ad nauseum here, Supriya, that let wiser heads prevail. If there is a collaborative manner in which civil society, the courts, the government, the regulators can come together to find a sensible path forward, that would be ideal. But we are ready for anything and we will do what it requires.
A quick last question on auto before I talk to you about the big picture, because I can't miss my conversation with you on that. The whole two-wheeler segment hasn't done as well for you as one had envisaged it to. When do you see that big kick-in happen in that segment? And of course, everybody keeps talking about the Peugeot acquisition, and when does benefit of that kick in?
Everything in good wine. Good wine, as you know, good vintages take time to brew.
Right.
We don't give up. We are marathoners, and I think, as I said, I started my career, Supriya, with people telling me in 1990 that we should get out of cars and that we would not survive. So I just smile when I hear stories like this. We're still around. We're still making cars. We're still the dominant player. So watch this space.
You know, you spoke about the rural economy when we began this whole discussion with, and of course there are no two ways about it. There have been two droughts and the rural economy is in rather bad shape. The government, of course, is now focusing on trying to rev up things. Obviously that has taken a hit on demands. When do you see that change? You spoke about the big international financing being the one trigger that will, see demand change. But what about the rural economy? Is that a space that's bothering you? Because you've got your skin in the game there.
Of course it bothers us, and it bothers us not just because of sales, but because there is real suffering out there.
Right.
There is deprivation. People who had the bad weather in a row and then the untimely winter rains which killed a lot of the standing crop, that's really unfair to that rural population. I think they deserve a little bit of luck with the monsoon. If we can get a little bit of luck and we have a good monsoon, what is going to happen is that the rural economy will start up again simply because there's been a lot of crop diversification. There are a lot of people who've been doing a lot of work, NGOs and the others,
right,
where things are going to start changing in the rural economy.
It's interesting that the Prime Minister made a statement at an ET function just very recently. He said, when it comes to subsidy for farmers, it's called this subsidy, but when it comes to SOPs for the industry, it's called incentives, and we should change that mindset. How do you read that statement? Is it a populist or a pragmatic statement that he's made?
No, I think it's an out-of-the-box statement. It's very interesting, and I think he's got a point. Now you might say I'm biased, as people who control 40% of the tractor market.
Right.
Frankly, yes, I would love to see more money in the pockets of the farmers, and if there is a more politically correct term that could be applied to subsidies, I'm delighted.
So you're happy with subsidies being called incentives, just like it is?
No, let's be fair to the man. He is. It's not simply a play with words. He's got a point. That are incentives to industry subsidies? I guess that could be debated. So I applaud him for finding a way of looking at things differently. Isn't that what you all ask us? Look at things differently. How does innovation come? How does creativity come? It comes when you see the same thing and look at it differently. So let's give the man kudos.
This is a creative perspective to what is perhaps something that has been denounced for a very long time. A lot of people believe that India is this one shining spot in this turbulence, and I remember we were at Davos and we talked about this, and there are two ways to look at it. We were either, we were looking good, and now that the world is looking so bad that we're looking a lot better. The question is, are we a little too despondent about ourselves, or are we perhaps assuming a bit too much of this bright spot tag that India suddenly seems to have
I think India is never despondent about itself. Aren't there these surveys that always show we're the happiest people in the world? So, and without indulging in any illegal substances, I think we are a happy race. We always look optimistically at the future. I think that's one of the strengths of India. So I don't think we're despondent.
But when you talk about the whole macro picture, if you look at our markets, for instance, they're down 20-odd% from the highs. The rupee is at levels of 68, which is not a very comfortable position for the rupee, even though the governor believes that's the reasonable rate for the rupee. It's almost as if the entire Modi premium is wiped out. Don't you agree with me there?
How did you end up with the Modi premium from what you read?
The whole market rally that one did see was the Modi premium. It happened when the government came to power. The macro economy hasn't really picked up. We will end at growth levels of 7.3%. Yes, inflation has been reined in, but that's largely due to a very, very tight monetary policy.
My God, you sound despondent. It sounds like I have to cheer you up the way.
But how do you see this? I mean, are we really a bright spot? I mean, as compared to the rest of the world, yes, maybe, which is growing at 2%.
I was in California launching one of the Gen Z scooter, and I had a dinner there with a lot of Valley people, and there was a very, very eminent and successful emerging markets investor, and we were going around the table talking about what's their view on India. And he said, look, in the world today, he sees only 3 spots worth investing where there is genuine optimism about growth. He said the US, India, and surprise, surprise, the Philippines. I don't know where he came up with that. We are, as you know, we are big in the Philippines now.
True.
So I was delighted. But that's the view from California, that the 3 bright spots in the world are the US, India, and the Philippines. So has the premium gone down? Is the despondency justified? No.
I guess I'm going to go back a little more optimistic after this.
Cheer yourself up. Yeah,
but
absolutely.
We must talk about crude oil prices, because again, this is something that impacts your industry and impacts the larger economy. The government is going to make savings worth about $70 to $80 billion on oil this year, because the regime has been very benign. Do you believe the government has leveraged that enough?
I think it has, by raising excise duty and mopping up that surplus. It's very clever. People are constantly saying for sustainability what you need is a carbon tax. What is an excise duty on fuel? It's a carbon tax. So in fact, we are very, very advanced as a nation, and as a country that needs to generate surpluses to reduce its fiscal deficit in order to put money into infrastructure. This is a bonanza which you have to leverage by raising excise duty. So they're doing the right thing. But as we started out the interview, all I'm saying is that though they're doing the right things, the reality is it hasn't trickled down yet into investment on the ground, groundbreaking, and therefore resulting in demand for trucks and cars. Will it happen? Yes. But I wish it would happen sooner.
I will just talk to you about private investment and why it hasn't been crowded in, because that was the whole objective of delaying fiscal consolidation. But because you mentioned fiscal deficit, you've almost put me to my next question. You know, this old narrative in New Delhi is back. Should you meet the fiscal deficit target to the last decimal point, or should you let it expand a little in quest of growth, in quest of investments? Which side of this entire debate do you stand on? Because some people believe, let alone the decimal point, you should go ahead there, invest, let growth take out. Others believe it's a question of credibility. You've made a promise, you might still achieve it.
You've summarized the two positions very well.
For your answer.
You summarized them very well. I tend to be a little more Keynesian and a little more aggressive at a time when we are one of the bright spots.
Right.
So frankly, I've been on record as saying that I would urge a little more liberalism when it comes to cutting rates. I think that signal is required. And yes, now that we have demonstrated that we know how to manage stability, and Raghuram Rajan's done an outstanding job.
True.
He's a superstar outside. Everyone there
Yes.
feels confident. But now I think time has come to use that, the sweet spot we're in. And yes, I would agree. And as I said, I would be a little more Keynesian at this point.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow, and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/ETNow.